Welcome to the No BS Spiritual Book Club's live streaming interview series, where leading new thought teachers, speakers, and authors share the intimate stories behind the 10 best spiritual books that inspired them the most on their spiritual journey. From well-known classics to hidden gems you might never have heard of, the No BS Spiritual Book Club saves you time and money by sharing reliable recommendations from those who've walked the path before you. The No BS Spiritual Book Club, the only no BS guide to the best spiritual books to inspire your own journey of self-discovery. Here's your host, founder of the No BS Spiritual Book Club, Sandy Sedgbeer.
Hello and welcome. Joining me today to share the 10 books that had the biggest impact on his life journey is modern mystic, soul tinkerer, and shaman disguised in business clothes, Vish Chatterji, who after a successful career as an engineer, executive and entrepreneur is now honouring his sole purpose as an East meets West executive coach and Vedic wisdom teacher. Vish Chatterji, welcome.
Hi, Sandy. I'm so happy to be on the show and to have a book discussion. I love books.
Good. That's one of the first questions I was going to ask you about your relationship with books.
Yeah, so I mean, I love reading. I've loved reading since I was a young child. I used to read in bed. I'd read in the morning. I'd read in the afternoon, in the evening. Often you find me in the couch, curled up in the living room, reading a book. And then I went to university. I went to engineering school, and I remember sitting in these engineering lectures, just being bored out of my mind. And I thought, what am I doing for an hour listening to this professor drone on and on? I can get that same information and double if I just read the book. So I started skipping class and reading the textbook instead. And I got so much more information out of that. So I find that maybe the way my brain works, I really absorb more from the written word than I do in an audio lecture typically.
So you're not an Audible guy then?
No, I read much faster than it would be read, and I process. And the thing about reading is you can take your own time. So you can read a paragraph really fast if you want to get through it. And then when there's something you want to, zoom in on, contemplate, meditate, you can sort of zoom in on that paragraph. And then between every paragraph, there's a pause to sort of soak in the information. Whereas, in audio, you're sort of at the pace of the speaker, right?
Yeah. I like Audible when I'm driving. The rest of the time, I prefer to read books. So tell me, what was it like for you to have to pick just 10?
So when you said 10 books to pick, and obviously I have a library of hundreds of books, I thought this is daunting. But once I got into it, it happened right away. Like the 10 books sort of just fell out. I'm like, oh, these are the books that, there was probably, I would say 10 books that easily came to the list, and another 4 or 5 that are more esoteric texts that I would say they're not really books necessarily. They're sort of, wisdom texts that are, I wouldn't recommend as a book necessarily unless you're ready for that type level of information. So the 10 books that I picked are books that are easily accessible. And when you read them, you have a transformational experience through that process, whether it's the energy behind the book, the energy behind the words, or the book is written in such a way that you have to practically do something, and that leads to the shift.
Yeah, well, let's start with your first book, which I have to tell you consistently appears in the top 10 books of all those that have been recommended over the last 4 years. And it is Autobiography of a Yogi, Paramahansa Yogananda, published in 1946. I'm curious to know, when did your spiritual journey start? And was this one of the first books that you read?
I would say when I was a kid, I saw that book on my dad's nightstand, and I didn't know what it was. I didn't know what a yogi was. I was just a kid. And it was this orange cover with this, Indian man with long hair. And when I asked about it, all I learned was he's a Bengali. And I'm Bengali. That's the part of India I'm from. So, okay, there's a guy who has this funny word yogi and is Bengali and kind of looks like people in my family. So that was all I knew. And along the way, I'd always seen my dad do a morning yoga practice. I mean, throughout my life, he every morning woke up early and did a yoga practice. And I think I must have been around the age of 9 or 10. And I asked him finally, I said, Dad, would you teach me some yoga? And he said, look, Vish, I'm not qualified to teach you. This is a sacred system that you just can't learn from anybody. It's not something that I'm, ready to teach you. You have to find the right teacher. So he kind of planted the seed in my head. And many years later, I went to university. And as I finished my university studies, I decided to go to India to try to find myself. And I went on this, 3-month journey across India from east to west, sleeping in railway stations, sitting on the roofs of buses, having chai with the babas, the renunciates, the ascetics in the forest. And along the way, I met a yoga teacher, Yogi Rishi Vishwaketu, who I actually wrote my first book with. And he is a Himalayan yoga master, a living, real life Himalayan yoga master. But at the time he was young, we are about the same age. And he became like a brother to me. He first taught me yoga. So he was my yoga teacher. And when I started practicing yoga, it opened up a lot of channels for me. And then I started coming into these various books. So somewhere after my yoga practice, I came across Autobiography of Yogi as an adult and read it. And it was one of those books that takes you on a mystical journey. And at the time, it seems like all these people have passed on, these dead people. We're reading about these dead people, right? But when you read the book, they actually come alive and you start to wonder, are they really dead? Are they somewhere? Are they communing with me somehow through the reading of this book? And I think many people who read that book have that experience where it seems like they're alive. And now in my own studies as a Vedic astrologer, as a yogi, I very much feel like they're available. They're there and they're providing guidance. They're, light beings that are accessible to us. And then of course, now I've learned that his guru's guru was an astrologer. And one of the calculations I use to do astrology charts, it's called the Lahiri Ayanamsha, to correct the math to the sky. That is based on Yogananda's guru's guru, Lahiri. So it all connected.
Mm. Yeah, it's just a beautiful book. I mean, I had it on CD. I had about 20 of them in a set. It was that long, and it's just, well, I think it's incomparable.
Yeah. What do you think about the blue cover versus the orange cover version?
I didn't even know until I read your description because I'd only ever seen the orange.
Mm.
I've never come across a blue cover version.
Yeah. So in that time in India, there was a very strong British influence to Indian English, and almost like the British English of the legal court system. If you ever read a legal document in England, it's quite complex, that language.
Mm.
And I feel like many of the gurus of India, that's how they actually spoke in that time, because under British rule. So the blue book, the blue cover version, is original writings, original sort of prose of him, and I can barely understand it. I feel like that's a book that you have to soak in and sort of absorb little by little over a lifetime. But the orange book, the orange cover one, is the one that's popularly available and edited for understanding purposes and for, mass awareness. If they hadn't done the edited orange version, I don't think the book would have been as popular.
No, no.
So it made it accessible, right?
I
And you,
don't think that anyone who has chosen this book could have read the blue one because I'm sure they would have said.
yeah, exactly. So I feel like that's the opening and the awakening happens with the orange version. And orange is a beautiful color because as an astrologer, orange connects to Jupiter, right? So Jupiter energy is of wisdom and expansion. And blue is a color connected to Saturn, which is actually more constriction, but it's also discipline and persistence and determination and focus.
Which is exactly what you need to read the blue version.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. Interesting. Well, let's move on to book 2, which is Chance of a Lifetime, Searching for a Heart of Gold. And that was written by your favorite musician, Krishna Das, in 2010.
Yeah, Krishna Das is, just a very special being, right? He's a devoted follower of Neem Karoli Baba. Neem Karoli Baba again is passed on, but Krishna Das seems to have communion with him all the time. I had an experience once where I felt like Neem Karoli Baba was in the room, and I thought, oh, maybe I need to believe in this stuff a little bit more. These people, even though they've passed on, they're around. So what happened with Krishna Das is I came back from my yoga, exploits in India in 1999. I was, in my early 20s. And as I, came back to the working world, I started my career. I would be involved with yoga groups and yoga. You go to yoga class, and they were playing this music that just sounded beautiful. And I came across one of Krishna Das's albums, and he sings this Hare Krishna song, and he sings, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Hare Ram, Hare Ram. And in the background, there's a backup singer that starts to get more intense. And then Krishna Das fades to the background, and the backup singer comes to the foreground in the song. And that backup singer was none other than Sting. And I thought, this is fascinating. Like, there's Sting, the Sting singing, and here's Krishna Das. And Krishna Das wasn't really known at the time. And I just fell in love with that type of music, that style of music of taking these Indian, beautiful, traditional songs, but combining them with, Western Amazing Grace, for instance. So I became a huge fan of Krishna Das, and I was listening to his music all the time. And my mother was like, "What are you becoming a yogi here? You're gonna leave your career and go live in a forest ashram?" And I had the opportunity to meet Krishna Das a few times along the way. And I was with my teacher, Vishwa Ketu, and him and Krishna Das know each other. And they asked, my teacher, Vishwa, said, let me take a photo with Krishna Das. So I said, okay, let me get the camera. I took a picture of the two of them, and I gave the camera back. And then Krishna Das turned to me and said, hey, how about you? Don't you want a photo too? And I thought, what a kind-hearted man. Like, I'm at the time the assistant to the yogi. And he's like, why don't you get a photo as well? And then I met Krishna Das a few other occasions along the way. And every time that this Heart of Gold is one of the names of his album, this Heart of Gold came out. And at one time I was with my kids, and he said, hey, let's take a picture of your kids. And so the kids got a photo with Krishna Das. Very, very kind man. So I read his book, Chance of a Lifetime. And it was another one of those books that really took me to another place. And in the process of reading it, around that time in my life, my mother had a severe heart issue. She had a triple bypass surgery. And she was, older at the time as well. And she came out of surgery and ended up in the intensive care unit and wasn't able to breathe on her own for a few days. And I remember the doctor said, it's not looking good. We're going to have to pull her off the life support. She's unable to manage on her own. And I had this, crisis, like, here, I think my mother's about to go. And I had that book in my hand, and I just sat by her, and I was reading a paragraph in that book, and one of the songs came to my mind. And I had one of those moments, like, those indescribable moments. I think many of your listeners probably understand this, where you sort of lose your sense of reality, time, space, causality, and you have a moment of samadhi. And I had that moment. And, when you finish the moment, you come back and you're like, did that really happen? Was that real? I'm sort of questioning. But the doctor came by and said, we just saw her vitals improve. And
Wow.
and it, what a coincidental moment, but her vitals improved. And within an hour or two after that moment, we pulled her off the breathing machine, and she started breathing on her own, and she lived for a good 15 years after that. So yeah, it was.
Did you tell her that?
Yeah, I shared that with her. I don't think she quite understood, though. My mother wasn't quite there. And then within 5 years after that time, her mind declined, and she ended up suffering a dementia. So then she wouldn't have understood anyway. But it was one of the very special moments that happened with that book. And again, is it the book? Is it Neem Karoli Baba? Is it Krishna Das? Is it a combination? Is it me? You never quite know. But, I guess when you're ready, a book can really speak to you and have a powerful effect.
Yeah, that's very true. Everybody says that.
Mm.
So book number 3,
Mm-hmm.
Astrology Decoded, The Secret Science of India's Sages, written by a young man called Vish Chatterji, published just 6-7 weeks ago?
That's right. That's right. So, this is a book that flowed through. It flowed through. I was given a very tight timeline by my publisher to make this book. We wrote the contract, and then they wanted me to write it within 3 months. And, this is a very heavy, deep topic of Vedic astrology. And in my astrology studies, I'd only found books in the market that are for really serious students of Vedic astrology. So the average casual person doesn't really have an on-ramp. So I felt this calling to write a book that is the on-ramp to the Vedic astrology system, just giving a basic understanding of what is this other very sophisticated, elegant system that exists out there. And as you know, many of the spiritual community, the yoga community, they follow Western astrology, and it's very popular and very well known and very well understood. But there's this equally powerful system that is unknown and not accessible. So my role was, how do I make this more accessible? And when I first wrote the manuscript, it was supposed to be a paperback, book that's easy to digest. But the publisher enjoyed the book so much, they decided to make it a hardcover, and they elevated in their focus. And so I have the book here, and you can see they just created this beautiful, like, gold and silver foil inlay on the cover. This
We
beautiful
can only
foil.
see it back to front.
Oh, it's reversed. Okay, but the pages, the paper quality, they went with thick paper, so it just became this sort of heirloom quality volume. And I just felt that work was honored so well by the artistic designers and creators at the publishing company. And then, now, once you write a book and you start to read through it again, you start to realize, like, that was the teaching that I needed as well.
Yes.
The book luxuriates in the energy and personality and mythology of each of the planets used in astrology, Western or Vedic. And so it's a way to sort of commune with the planets. And I definitely believe the planets communicated their story through me. Before I would write, I'd always do my worship, my prayers, my mantras. I would ask for guidance from the planets. Prior to writing the book, I'd also helped install a set of 9 planet statues in our local temple. And so I think the planets came through me and communicated and created the book. And so it's powerful.
I've got two things to say about that. One is, many guests ask me, can I actually put my own book on this list? Does it sound a little bit egotistic? And I always say, no, you can put 1 or 2. You can't put 40 if you've written 40 books. But because the process of writing is going to change you. It's going to change your life, so your book deserves to be there, as anyone else's, has had that impact on you. And the other thing, is many people think they can't write. But what they don't realize is that when they start to write, they open themselves up and it comes through them. I've never yet met somebody who didn't say, wow, I don't know who wrote that book. There's things there that I wouldn't normally say. And so, that's my advice to anyone is, write, because you'll be opening yourself up to something bigger.
That's right. It flows through you. The knowledge and information comes through, and the editing process is incredible. In both my books, the editors, they almost remove the clutter of the words for the soul to shine through. That's the power of a good editor. They understand the heart and meaning that you want to get out there, and they just get rid of the clutter and make it shine through. And then you read what they've edited, and you're like, wow, that's my heart shining there. So it's definitely a combined effort. Yeah.
A good editor is like a good sculptor. They take away everything that isn't what needs to be there.
Yeah. And it's a soul wrenching process. I will say that. My first book, when I went through it, it was soul wrenching. Second book, I was used to. I was like, okay, I know what to do here. I know what's going to happen.
So book number 4 is Journey Home, Autobiography of an American Swami. How do you pronounce it? Radhanath Swami? Radhanath?
Yeah, Radhanath Swami. He's one of the spiritual leaders of the Krishna consciousness movement. So the ISKCON, the Hare Krishnas are always playing music and singing Hare Krishna, and they have temples all over the world. He's one of their leaders. He's a major spiritual leader and humanitarian in the world. And I read this book, and it felt like I went on a journey to India in the 1970s. He just wrote it so well, where he's this, Jewish kid from Chicago, I think, and he made his way across the Atlantic, ended up in London, I think, and then basically traveled by surface all the way to India in the 1970s. And he's going through the Middle East, going through these mountain passes. So that's already an adventure in itself, right? The adventure of traveling overland to India in those days at that time. Then he arrives in India and sees this little picture of a blue baby thing. He doesn't know what it is. This is bluish baby god, right? He doesn't know what it is. It turns out to be Krishna. And now, of course, he's the leader of the Krishna movement. And he feels called to give up everything and go live in the forest. And, if you travel to India, to the spiritual places, you'll come across these beings that have given up their whole material life to just live in the forest and, sleep under the trees and forage and beg for food here and there when they come to a village and do very deep, intense spiritual practices. But they're very mysterious people. You don't really know what is that life like, but he communicates it in his book. Like, so you get this first hand look at what it is like to be a forest renunciate on the pursuit of the spiritual path. So that was, I think, amazing. And then I was always confused because everywhere in the book, he kept running across this guy named Gary. Like wherever, he shows up in Iran and there's Gary. He shows up in London, there's Gary. He shows up in Pakistan, there's Gary. He shows up in the, some spiritual town and there's Gary. This guy keeps appearing. An old friend of his from Chicago. How do they keep having these coincidental meetings at random times? And I had the opportunity to meet Radhanath Swami at Bhakti Fest at one of this yoga festival. And he's published by Mandala Publishing, the same publisher that published my book. So we happened to be in the tent and I got the introduction. I sat with Radhanath Swami and I was chatting with him. And one of the things about Radhanath Swami, when you meet him, he has this beautiful smile and he gives you this hug that takes you away. He gives you a hug and you like leave your body for a moment, right? So he gives me a hug. He sits down, we start talking. And I tell him, I was so moved by your story and by your book, but I just don't understand. How do you keep meeting this guy, Gary, all the time? He said, "Oh, Vish, there, Gary is right there." I said, "What do you mean Gary's right there?" He's like, "He's sitting there." And I see a guy in a tank top, kind of muscular guy in shorts, just sitting there with a goofy grin. And sure enough, it was Gary from the book. They've been lifelong friends since that time. And I happened to have one of those coincidental meetings right there in the desert of Joshua Tree, California at the yoga festival.
I would think Gary's got quite a story to tell as well.
He won't tell it. He's just a quiet sort of, behind the scenes, not very well known, no following or anything. He just does his own quiet spiritual practices and is friends with one of the biggest spiritual leaders in the world today.
Yeah. Yeah. That's an interesting thing to watch.
Yeah. So if you ever meet Radhanath Swami, look around and you'll see this kind of bearded, muscular guy lurking in the background. It's Gary from the book.
Shadow. Book number 5, Encounter the Enlightened, Conversations with the Master by Sadhguru, published in 2004.
Yeah. So Sadhguru is again another major dominant, personality in the, as far as spiritual celebrities go. He commands, hundreds of thousands of people. He has major ashrams, a worldwide presence. And I met him when he was unknown. So I think he was, well known in India. He'd become enlightened. He'd become this spiritual being. And he started coming to America, and he would come to American corporations and offer these courses on yoga. So at the time, I was early in my career. I was an engineer at Roush Industries, and I had a contract with Ford Motor Company. So I would sit in Ford Motor Company's powertrain engineering building. So this is where all the engine engineers sit together and engineer cars. And I'm sitting in there, and I've got this little cubicle, and then I walk down the hall, and there's Henry Ford's original office and wood paneling, and on your way to the cafeteria. And as you reach the cafeteria, there was a poster that said, "Inner Engineering, Sadhguru, come attend a free talk." I was like, "Oh, that sounds interesting. I'm kind of into yoga. I'm into that. Inner engineering, some guru from India at Ford Motor Company. Let me go." So the few days later, I show up in the whatever cafeteria they had set him up in, and there's this bearded guy with a turban and robes, and he's talking about spirituality. There's maybe 30, 40 engineers that showed up. And he gave a lovely talk. I mean, just brilliant, like, mind-blowing talk. And he said, "Hey, I'm offering a 7-day training. Do you want to come? It's in a few weeks." And I said, "Yeah, I'm in. I signed up." And this was a time where you could just sit and chat with him, and he'd laugh and giggle the same way he does now. And he would take us in a meditation. And again, you'd have that experience, that same experience that you read Autobiography of Yogi, that samadhi experience would happen in his presence, right? That's how you know that he's a real deal. And then I, sort of picked up his book, right? The book was available, so I got it, and he signed it. The version I have is signed by him. And I remember that when I read the book, I would have almost like that front row seat again of being in his presence. So somehow reading the book, you feel like you're in his presence. And of course, today, if you want to have a private audience of Sadhguru, good luck. Like, he's like the Dalai Lama. Like, it's not going to happen. It's going to be very, very difficult. He's, sold out everywhere he goes. He's a major, major spiritual teacher. But I felt like that early book was pure before the empire, before the enterprise, before the fame. This was his very heartfelt writings with no sort of publisher pushing for it to be more palatable. This is just his original mystical, enlightened writings.
I interviewed him, I would say 7 or 8 years ago, but they would only let me have half an hour.
Yeah.
Yeah. He's certainly, wow, he's huge.
Yeah, amazing you had the opportunity to interview him. That's incredible.
Yeah. Okay, we're going to take a short break now.
Yeah.
You're listening to a No BS Spiritual Book Club interview, and sharing his 10 best list of most inspirational books today is modern mystic, soul tinkerer, spiritual coach, and author of Astrology Decoded, The Secret Science of India's Sages, and The Business Casual. And the guest is, sorry?
The Business Casual Yogi.
Sorry, the Business Casual Yogi. Yes. Vish Chatterji. All these SHs and Gs, get in the way. So we'll be back with more from Vish after the break.
Om Times TV.
Maya Angelou once said that there is no greater agony than bearing an untold story inside you. I'm Sandy Sedgbeer, and when I'm not hosting Om Times Media's flagship radio show What Is Going On and the No BS Spiritual Book Club, I help people share their untold stories. Books are my life, my joy and my passion, and there is no greater reward than helping aspiring writers get their books out of their heads and into the hands of those who are waiting to read them. If you feel that you have a book in you but don't know where to begin, visit sedgbeer.com. Click on the Work With Me tab and find out how my experience helping others tell their stories might be just what you've been looking for. That's sedgbeer.com, sedgbeer.com.
Imagine becoming a super influencer. Reinvent yourself, invest in your brand, and then manifest your success with a robust spheric approach. Om Times Media and Broadcasting offers a unique and multifaceted way to become the spiritual and conscious influencer you deserve to be by putting your message across our powerful platform with its proven record of integrity and excellence. Through our produced shows, Om Times offers the opportunity to become a social media TV personality, a radio show host, an Om Times magazine columnist, and a syndicated podcaster, all in one shot. By live streaming your show on Om Times TV and broadcasting it across the extensive Om Times radio and TV networks, you become more than a host. You become an ambassador and a force for positive change. Om Times. Open yourself to the possibilities.
Everything that we do, we can do in a contemplative manner. Through the art of contemplation, you can use the gene keys in a really powerful way. Gene Keys is basically the code book of life. In the Gene Keys, the book is made up of these 3 levels: shadows, gifts, and siddhis. And the journey is through those 3 levels, kind of unpicking of the shadow states, the releasing of the gifts, and then the embodying of this higher consciousness called the siddhi. And the siddhis are very exalted words. And it's not like we kind of suddenly are all these exalted Christ-like beings, but we have flashes and illuminations along the journey. And the more we get stuck into the journey, the more illumination comes to us, because the more we're releasing the light from in these codes inside our DNA. So all those revelations are inside us. So the contemplative way is the inner way.
There are 16 million children struggling with hunger in America. That's 1 in 5 daughters, sons, neighbors, and classmates who don't know where their next meal is coming from. Yet billions of pounds of good food go to waste every year. It's time we do something about it. Feeding America is a nationwide network of food banks that helps provide meals to millions of kids and families in need. Visit feedingamerica.org to help them feed even more. Together, we can solve hunger. Together, we're feeding America.
Welcome back. Vish Chatterji. Okay, book number 6, Free to Love, Free to Heal. Heal Your Body by Healing Your Emotions, Dr. David Simon, published in 2009.
Yeah, I did some training at the Chopra Center in their meditation training and their Ayurvedic mind body medicine training. And I learned that the Chopra Center, so it was founded by Deepak Chopra, but there was this other guy, Dr. David Simon, again, more of a silent person, but a major founder of that Chopra Center.
Mm.
And just as Deepak was enamored with Western medicine, he was a Western doctor who then found his own root culture, Indian medicine. David Simon was an American trained doctor, but always fascinated with Indian medicine. He was always drawn to Ayurveda and the mind body medicine system of India. And his background was neurology. So he really understood the brain and human psychology. And he used to lead these retreats around healing the heart. That was kind of his specialty, was understanding trauma and the wounds on the heart and how to come through those. I never had the opportunity to meet him. He'd passed away by the time I'd joined the Chopra Center trainings. But I came across his book, Free to Love, Free to Heal. And I started reading it, and it gave you these very practical exercises. Well, first of all, it helped you understand, why do you have wounds? Like, what is an emotional wound? What is trauma? What is it that we face? Why did those things happen? And then he gives you these very specific techniques to work through them and release them. And, I took a gamble. I said, okay, I can devote the time and the energy. Let me follow the steps in the book. And I followed those steps, and I started doing every exercise he said to do, whether it was writing or, in one point I remember standing at the beach and throwing rocks into the ocean and screaming. And people walking by were like, "Are you okay?" I'm like, yeah, I'm okay. I'm just following the instructions in this book. And I had some really major healing from my own challenges that I faced in my life. And I've now recommended that book to many clients who have suffered severe trauma in their childhood, and they've found incredible healing from it. So it's almost like, you can do the work with the therapist, you can do the work with the psychologist, you can work with an astrologer, all those things. But this is sort of a one-stop book where you can do your own work and really accelerate that process. And I've found that the teaching of that book to this day, when my kids even face something difficult, I'll pull little exercises from that book, and they find a way through it. So it's a very, very powerful book for opening the heart. And I feel like a lot of the clients that I work with, some of them have real emotional challenges with relationships. They feel challenged in finding a relationship or having a healthy relationship, and it stems from their own relationship with themselves and things they faced when they were younger. And this book seems to heal that. It seems to heal the broken wounds of the heart, allowing more love to flow in somebody's life, allowing for that more beautiful relationship to happen.
Yeah, I know he is much missed.
Mm.
Book number 7, The Business Casual Yogi, Take Charge of Your Body, Mind and Career by Vish Chatterji. And I'm not even going to begin to attempt to pronounce your co-author's name. I'll let you do that.
Yog Rishi Vishwaketu. And
Okay.
Yog Rishi means teacher of yoga, and so it's a title, and then Vishwaketu is his name. So I was at that yoga festival in the desert. Many things happen at desert yoga festivals, I'm starting to realize as I say it out loud. And I had volunteered to be his assistant, and he was teaching a class of about 150 people in the class. And back in those days, you would adjust people to help them get deeper into the pose. And so I was acting as his assistant, and I was going around and helping people get deeper into the pose and helping people breathe the right way. And I thought, I'm in this, hall full of yogis, like people pursuing their deeper inner truth. But most of my days are spent in the corporate boardroom as a corporate executive. And so I felt like there's these two tribes I live in, the tribe of the corporate worker and the tribe of the yogis. And I thought, there's this complete divide, because the corporate person doesn't trust the yogi and the yogi doesn't trust the business person. It's a complete divide. And the yogi needs a little bit more of that grounding and understanding of the material world to teach in that world and to be financially prosperous. Meanwhile, the corporate people need that spiritual grounding because all they're chasing is the money and the power. And so I said, could I be the bridge of those two worlds? And that is what inspired the Business Casual Yogi, because I'm a bridge of that world, a living, walking dressed in business casual clothes, but I'm a yogi. And so I asked Vishwaketu if he'd partner with me in this book. And the concept was, can I take the wisdom of the Himalayan yogi and put it in a form that's relatable to everyday working people? And that's what the book accomplished, is it took the teachings of yoga and made them very accessible to everyday working people and helped them find a way to have a grounded daily spiritual practice. And of course, the book launched. It did really well in the corporate world, in the corporate space. But then after it launched, I realized that many yogis, practitioners of yoga, have no idea about the philosophy of yoga beyond the yoga mat. They don't understand the yamas, niyamas, asana, pranayam, pratyahara, dharana, dhyan, samadhi, the 8 limbs of yoga. They don't understand the difference between Raja Yoga, Karma Yoga, Jnana Yoga, Bhakti Yoga, the 4 different paths. And so I'm finding that a lot of people in the yoga world are missing basic information about the philosophy of yoga. So I'm finding when a yogi reads the book, they get that sort of fill in the gaps of all the information that they should know as a yoga person. But it also gives them this idea of how to then orient their life towards more prosperity and success. I find many yogis really struggle financially. So it's almost like this market of yogis that we missed because of the title, right? Like many of my yoga friends are like, oh, business, I don't like that. And it's like, well, how do you afford rent? And they're like, well, I really struggle with rent. So it's like you have to embrace the financial prosperity along with your spiritual practice. They have to go hand in hand.
So you could bring out another version and just change the title.
Yeah, if I get rid of the word business, I think, well, then it's casual yogi, which yogis are very serious. So
yeah. Do you find, like Sadhguru, that you are now being asked to go into corporations and talk to, their executives and teach?
For me, it's been the other way. I was always deeply in the corporate world as an executive coach and teaching stress relieving techniques in the corporate world, but also leadership, mission, vision. What is your personal purpose? So I was always deeply in the corporate world, and that was really where my business first was. Now I'm being invited to more spiritual communities. So I'm going the opposite way, where the spiritual people are like, oh, you know what? He has something to say. He does know a lot about the spiritual things, but in a very practical, material world kind of understanding.
Which is how we need it.
Yeah.
Okay, book number 8, 1,000 Suns, Designing Your Future with Vedic Astrology by Linda Johnsen, published in 2004.
Yeah, so sadly, this book is out of print. So if you have a copy, you're very, very blessed. If you can find a copy, you're very blessed. Linda Johnsen, I think, is also an MBA. I think she's similar to me in very highly educated in the material world. And I came across this book and I thought it was one of the best books on Vedic astrology I'd come across. A little bit more advanced than my book. It's a little bit more for a serious student of Vedic astrology, but it really helps you understand the energy and the signs and the calculations and the planets and how they work. And the book, you read a book and you think there must be something else going on with this author. And I found that she had written some other books. One of them was deep on goddess worship. So she's a huge worshiper of the goddess archetype. And so she brings that knowledge of understanding how to worship deities and female deity archetypes into the work on 1,000 Suns. So you start to understand the connection between Vedic astrology and work with archetypes and how to use archetypes to transcend difficult karmas in a birth chart. So that was very powerful for me because it really connected the dots more than just an intellectual exercise of planets and signs and birth charts, bringing it into this sort of devotional practice. The other book she wrote was Hinduism for Dummies. And, it sounds an odd title, Hinduism for Dummies, but I have it on my bookshelf in the family and all my kids have been reading it and we will read a chapter and discuss it. And you would think it's a book on Hinduism, but she's a Vedic astrologer. So she brings all that philosophical knowledge into a very basic practical level. And then I started to understand how my religion of Hinduism is a modern embodiment and derivative of the original Vedic system. And so many of the Hindu practices that Hindus don't even understand actually have an astrological basis and have a Vedic philosophy basis. And so I started to think about, apart from the rote follow this doctrine religion, there's actually an energetic component that's beyond it. And she was the one who really bridged that gap for me.
Book number 9, you said this was quite a life shifter. Getting Things Done, The Art of Stress-Free Productivity by David Allen, published in 2001.
So I came across this book when I was in the tech industry. I was working in the California, tech industry, everyone's dream, like tech entrepreneurial kind of. I was in charge of an internal startup in a company, and my workday ranged from anywhere from 15 to 18 hours a day. I mean, it was the intense uh, pressures and requirements of the tech industry. And I remember having a very messy desk, a completely overflowing email inbox, and just scattering, running from putting out one fire to another, dealing with vendors in China, dealing with engineers in India, dealing with the US market and retailers and what their needs were, and developing product and very, very difficult executive meetings that I was preparing hours for. And I was just, in a huff and a puff, basically, which is what my life felt like. And I noticed there were a few executives in the office that were very successful and had clean desks and empty inboxes. And I started to ask around, like, what's going on here? Is there some secret cult here of clean desks and empty inboxes? And it turned out there is a secret cult in the tech industry, and they called themselves GTDers. And I'm like, GTD, what is that? Getting things done. And so all these people had read this book, Getting Things Done by David Allen, and they started to follow his processes. And through that process, you start to really organize your whole life, everything in your life, not just work, but everything. And I, sure enough, became one of those GTDers that had a spotless desk and an empty inbox at the end of every day. And I went from that 15 to 18-hour day to about a 12-hour day. A massive shift for me. 12 hours for me was like, wow, that's an easy work day, like in comparison. And I followed that system to this day. It's been over 20 years I've been following that Getting Things Done system. And it gave me, the system asks you a lot of questions, like, why are you here? Why do you exist? And relates every big vision, dharmic purpose of your life down to every single action item you do. So you never do an action that isn't lined with your reason for existence. And it felt like it opened up time for me to have more spiritual practice in my life. And then I found out he lives in Ojai, California, which is a highly spiritually charged place. He is actually, in a way, a spiritual guru. And his next book was called Making It All Work, which goes much deeper in the spiritual things. And he basically, his thesis is, if you have your material life in order and have it all categorized and organized, when you sit to meditate or when you sit to do your spiritual practices, there's nothing else on your mind. You can be 100% present for every single moment you need to be there for. So it enabled presence along with success in the material world. So that's why I think that's, one of my game changer books for sure.
I went on to Goodreads to try and find when this was published, and I had to go through 4 very long pages of summaries of this book by different companies before I could get to the original book. So clearly, this is a highly, highly popular book.
Yes.
Yeah. So your last book, I have to say, first time this has ever been mentioned on this book club. And most people reading the title would say, what is this book doing, in this club? It is The Life-Changing Magic of Tidying Up, The Japanese Art of Decluttering and Organizing by Maria Kondo. And this was published in 2010. So what is this book doing on your list?
Oh, I'm so surprised that book has not shown up. It is a massively, in pop culture, in regular non-spiritual circles, it's a huge book. It's huge.
Mm.
I mean, bestseller, definitely. And I think she has a Netflix show now.
Oh,
So
yes.
she went big.
But where's
So
the spirituality?
yeah, so in the yoga tradition, as I mentioned, there's 8 limbs. There's the yamas and niyamas, and then there's the asana, pranayama, and the meditation steps. Within the niyamas and yamas, there's a particular tenet that says you need to honor socha. And socha means orderliness and cleanliness. And, many yogis interpret that to mean just keep your body clean, keep well groomed, or don't be messy, right? But I think what happens is when you live in clutter and mess, that clutter and mess has an energetic effect. And so what she teaches is you need to be surrounded by objects that bring you immense joy. And how do you figure out if an object brings you joy is hold it to your heart and see what it says to you. And I thought, well, that sounds very spiritual. So we went through our house and we started picking up objects that are there and holding them to our heart. And I kid you not, some objects you have this blip of like happiness and joy. And some things you're just like, I'm not feeling anything. Why do I have this? And we ended up going through the process in the book and getting rid of, I would say 20, 25 big black garbage bags full of stuff. That was just, I don't know why we had it. And it wasn't until we did that exercise of holding to our heart and realizing, oh, it doesn't do anything for me. And then she makes you say goodbye to it in a proper way. So thank you, old pair of jeans, for being so comfortable and serving me so well throughout your existence in my wardrobe. But now I'm saying I'm gonna let go and say goodbye to that. And so as we started getting rid of the stuff, first of all, people that came to visit thought we'd remodeled. I mean, our house looked different, right? But now when I'm in my house, it's a complete joyful experience because everything brings joy. I only have things that bring me joy. And then when I'm out buying something, I have no guilt because I'm like, I have the space for it. I want this new thing or whatever it is. And so I think the spiritual experience is that you start to develop a relationship with your very objects, and you start to realize that objects have energy, and what you choose to surround yourself with affects your energy. And now that I'm an astrologer, one of the related sciences of astrology is called Vastu. And Vastu is a science of space. And where do you put objects in your home because they have energetic value? And different corners of the home have different power. And you align objects in different places. Like the southwest of a corner of a home is a great place to put heavier objects because that's a heavier planet energy. The northeast is where you want to have water features. So then I started to realize that space means something. Your space means something. And if you have challenges in your life, if you make a change to the space, it changes things in your life. We're connected to all those objects. So I think when she says the life-changing magic, for me, it was life-changing magic for sure. And we live in a much tidier environment than ever before. And we're surrounded by things that just make our hearts sing.
Which is lovely. And that's very similar to feng shui, isn't it? I mean, the art of placement, that where you put something, and same thing about clutter in feng shui. If you've got clutter, then, you've got chaos in that particular area of your life.
Exactly right. Exactly right. Yeah. And it helps with that presence. Somebody commented, no one's 100% there if they don't have their work 100% organized. I think it's the GTD book is 100% organized gives you 100% presence, but then organized requires that lack of clutter, right? Getting rid of clutter. And it's difficult. The exercise is very difficult. But one of the things she says is like, take all the objects of one category and put them in a big pile. And then you look, you're like, wow, I have that many cables and cords. Like I have 50 cords for 4 devices. What's going on? Then you declutter, and then now you have the best cord of all. That's the only one you use, and you're much more careful and aware of it. So little things like that. And if you apply it to every category of object in the house, it really makes a big difference.
Yeah.
The
I can
cooking
see
experience
that.
in the kitchen is completely different now.
So that's your 10 best list. Let's talk about you in our last, we've got about, 8 minutes left. Born in Hong Kong, traveled to over 50 countries. You can get by in about 7 languages. You've studied in traditional Himalayan ashrams, and as you said, at the Chopra Center. You've already told us where your spiritual journey began. At that time when you were traveling, learning, did you ever feel that, the job that you were going to end up with was going to incorporate all of the spiritual as well as all of the business?
Never expected that. Never thought of that. And, I was in city politics for a long time. I was an elected official, and one of the city council members said to me, he said, Vish, most people get, nudged by the universe to do certain things. You just got a swift kick in the butt. so that's kind of how I played my life is I had the spiritual seed planted to have a yoga practice, have a meditation practice, but I used it as a way to just cope through my executive career. So for me, my goal in life was to be a CEO of something and to really work on rising up the corporate ladder. And so yoga for me was just a way to kind of stay calm, stay stress-free, and move along on my corporate journey. And then, of course, at some point, the universe really did kick me in the butt and said, "We're going to take this all away from you." And my startup collapsed, and I found myself trying to figure out which way to go. And somebody came to me and asked for coaching, and I thought, you know what, I'll coach. And I started coaching, started getting referrals, and starting helping people in their own leadership journey. And then when I went to formal coaching school, one of the questions was, what kind of a coach do you want to be? And I realized I'd had this yoga practice for 20 years, 25 years. I'd always been interested in it. Why didn't I merge the Eastern knowledge that I have with Western? So can I be an East meets West coach? And so I set that intention 8 years ago. And what I realized is East meets West means that on the Eastern side, I have to do some deeper spiritual practices. So I started taking my yoga and meditation practice to a completely different level of a much more mystical, deeper journey and practice. And that started to open up a different layers of knowledge for me, I would say. And that embodiment of the spiritual tradition is completely different now than it was in the early days. It's a much deeper journey. And now that has become my work, is combining my Western MBA hat with my, Vedic Eastern mysticism hat. And it's become who I am. But I never would have expected it. It's obvious in my chart. If you're an astrologer and you look at my chart, you'd be like, duh, obviously, right? But if you told me that 20 years ago, I wouldn't have been ready for the message. I would have said, no, I don't see that.
So your coaching practice is called Head and Heart Insights, and you counsel clients across the globe. If I came to you for a coaching session, would you combine everything? Would you combine the Vedic astrology with everything else?
It depends on the client, right? So it depends how open the client is. Astrology is one of those things that you don't want to force on somebody. So I meet my clients where they're at. So many executives come to me just for pure executive coaching. They're saying, look, I'm a leader in the company. I'm trying to figure out how to manage my team better, or I'm about to make an acquisition. How do I incorporate the employees of that division better? Or I'm struggling with, sometimes women executives say, look, I'm the only woman at the table. I'm really struggling with how to deal with these very, bully-like personalities in the room. And so I'll coach them purely on an executive coaching basis. There's many, many tools in executive coaching that help. Then, one of those clients might look at my website and say, hey, you do this other thing, would you? I remember one sales executive said to me, he was a senior director level. And he said, Vish, I've been coaching with you for 5 sessions, but when are you going to do that planet thing with me? I was like, oh, planet thing? You're open to that? Yeah, sure. And then it just opens up a different dimension. Some people want to do a personality test. They use their Myers-Briggs scores or their MBTI, their disc profile to coach with me through. Some of them say, hey, you've got this access to the ultimate personality test for astrology. Let's use that. And so I can use astrology also on different scales. It might be just, here's how you are as a leader, here are your challenges as a leader. Or it might be, here's your difficult, challenges that you faced in your life that are showing up in your leadership journey. Let's tackle some of those issues because I can see them in the chart. How many times I have a client say to me, how do you know that about me? I haven't even told that to my therapist. Right. So I kind of go the whole spectrum, and it's all about meeting, on the spiritual journey as a spiritual teacher, it's all about meeting people exactly where they're at.
Yes.
And just stretching them a little bit. Stretch too much and things break.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I've studied Western astrology for many, 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 many years. So I'm kind of, pretty, settled in that. I did have a Vedic reading once, a friend who said, you have to do this. And I've been fascinated by Vedic astrology. But I have to say, I don't know whose chart this person was reading, but not a single thing that she said, about me and about, the future was accurate. Not a single thing.
Your chart has Jupiter retrograde.
Has Mercury retrograde too.
It has Mercury retrograde. Everyone knows what that means, right? Mercury retrograde. But
Jupiter, we've only got a couple of minutes, Vish.
Yeah. Jupiter is the planet of the counselors and the astrologers. And Jupiter retrograde means you have to get a backwards reading from somebody. So that astrologer served a very good purpose in
So that
clearing the
explains
karma.
it.
Perhaps you were an astrologer in a previous life and you gave somebody a bad reading and you had to get your payback. So you got your payback and now you can tick that off the list. And now the karma hopefully is cleared to get a decent reading next time around. That's what I would say. It's all karma.
That's a really good answer. And you and I are going to have another interview on what is going on, and we can really dive deep into the differences between Vedic and Western astrology. I'm looking forward to that. Before we close, I have a question for you. Steve Jobs is reported to have given a copy of Autobiography of a Yogi to every person who attended his memorial.
Yes.
What book would you give to people at your memorial?
Oh, what a big question. And on the spot to answer that one.
Yeah, and you've only got a few seconds.
Yeah. It would probably be one of the spiritual books, the texts like a Bhagavad Gita, or the Mahabharat's a bit much to ask people to read. Then they'll curse me after I'm gone. So maybe it's the Bhagavad Gita. It's the spiritual book of the Vedic tradition and Indian tradition.
Good. It's interesting, isn't it, to think what book would you give to somebody at your memorial? Yeah, it's quite a statement. Vish Chatterji, thank you so much for adding your 10 best spiritual books to the No BS Spiritual Book Club's library of recommendations.
You're welcome, Sandy. This was a wonderful conversation. I hope the viewers will have lots of ideas to go forth and change their lives through books.
Yeah, I've really enjoyed it. So for more information about Vish Chatterji's books, work and coaching services, visit his website at Vish. I'm having real problems putting those two words together.
That's a Mercury retrograde.
Chatterji.com.
VishChatterji.com. Yes.
Yeah. That's it for this week. I'm Sandy Sedgbeer. I'll be back at the same time next week with another 10 best interview for the No BS Spiritual Book Club. Till then, it's goodbye from me. And thank you again to Vish.
Thank you, Sandy. Namaste, everyone.